Sarah's hands trembled as she folded the last of her meager belongings into a worn canvas bag. The bruise on her cheek had faded to a sickly yellow, but the memory of how she got it burned fresh in her mind. Through the thin walls of the Boston tenement, she could hear her husband's heavy footsteps climbing the stairs. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had maybe 2 minutes before he reached their door, 2 minutes before he discovered she was leaving. The advertisement had arrived 3 weeks ago, tucked inside a women's magazine at the general store. Seeking correspondence with respectable women interested in Western territories. Marriage prospects available. She had torn it out with shaking fingers and hidden it inside her Bible, the only book Thomas never touched. That night, while he lay passed out drunk on the kitchen floor, she had written her letter by candlelight. The response came faster than she dared hope. His name was Black Eagle, though the agency listed him as James Eagle. A Lakota chief seeking a wife who could teach English to the children of his tribe. The letter was brief, formal, but something in the carefully formed words spoke of kindness. He promised safety, respect, and a home in the Dakota Territory. Sarah didn't care about respect or home. She only cared about the word safety. The lock rattled. Thomas was trying his key, cursing as he fumbled with it. Sarah grabbed her bag and yanked open the window that faced the fire escape. The March wind bit through her thin dress, but she didn't hesitate. She had sewn her grandmother's pearl earrings into the hem of her skirt, the only valuable things she owned. They would buy her passage west. She climbed down 3 flights of rusted metal, her feet slipping on the icy rungs. Above her, she heard Thomas burst through the door, heard him bellowing her name. She dropped the last 6 feet to the alley and ran. Her lungs burned in the cold air, but fear gave her wings. She knew every back street and alley in this neighborhood, knowledge earned from previous escapes that had always ended with his fists and his promises to change. This time would be different. This time she wouldn't come back. The train station bustled with evening travelers. Sarah bought her ticket with trembling hands, trading one of her grandmother's earrings for passage to Rapid City. The clerk barely glanced at her face, too busy counting his commission. She found a seat in the third-class car and pressed herself against the window, watching the platform for any sign of Thomas. When the train finally lurched forward, she released a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. The journey west took 5 days. Sarah watched the landscape transform outside her window. The cramped brick buildings of Boston gave way to rolling farmland, then endless prairie. She had never seen so much open space. It terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. At night, she lay awake on the hard bench, wondering what kind of man would want a used-up woman like her. What kind of man would choose a bride sight unseen from an advertisement? The other passengers kept their distance. Her worn dress and healing bruises marked her as trouble. Only a young mother with 2 small children spoke to her, sharing bread and cheese when Sarah's own supplies ran out. The woman asked no questions, just pressed the food into Sarah's hands with knowing eyes. Some things needed no explanation between women. On the 5th morning, the conductor announced Rapid City. Sarah's stomach twisted into knots. She had no plan beyond arriving, no idea how to find Black Eagle or even if he would still want her. The advertisement agency had promised to send word of her arrival, but mail was slow and unreliable. She might be walking into nothing, stranded in a strange territory with 1 pearl earring and a bag of threadbare clothes. But as the train pulled into the station, Sarah made herself a promise. Whatever waited for her in this wild place, she would never go back. She would die free before she lived another day as Thomas's wife. The platform at Rapid City was nothing like the grand station Sarah had seen back east. Rough wooden planks served as flooring, and a single building barely larger than a shed functioned as the station house. A handful of people milled about, mostly rough-looking men in dusty clothes and women in simple prairie dresses. Sarah stepped off the train with her bag clutched to her chest, scanning the crowd for anyone who might be looking for her. She spotted him immediately, though she tried not to stare. He stood apart from the others, tall and still as a statue. His long black hair was pulled back from a face that could have been carved from bronze. He wore a mix of traditional and European clothing, buckskin pants, a clean cotton shirt, and a beaded vest that caught the morning light. But it was his eyes that held her. They were dark and deep, and when they found hers across the platform, she felt something shift in her chest. He approached slowly, as if afraid she might bolt. When he stood before her, Sarah realized he was even taller than she'd thought, broad-shouldered and powerful. Everything about Thomas had been mean and compact. This man looked like he could break her in half without effort. She flinched involuntarily. Sarah Mitchell. His voice was low and careful, the English precise but accented. I am Black Eagle. James Eagle. You came. I came, she whispered, then cleared her throat and tried again. Yes, I'm Sarah. I'm sorry I didn't send word ahead. I left quickly. His eyes moved over her face, taking in the fading bruises. His expression didn't change, but something hardened in his gaze. You are safe now. No one will hurt you here. He said it simply, as if stating a fact as unchangeable as the sky being blue. Sarah wanted desperately to believe him. He led her to a sturdy wagon hitched to 2 horses. The town of Rapid City was small but growing, with new buildings sprouting up between established businesses. They passed a general store, a saloon, a church with fresh white paint. People stared as they walked by. A white woman with an Indian man drew eyes, though no one said anything directly. Sarah lifted her chin and ignored them. She had survived worse than disapproving looks. The ride to the reservation took 3 hours. Black Eagle didn't push conversation, seeming content to let the silence stretch between them. Sarah studied the landscape, amazed by the vast openness. Hills rolled away in every direction, covered in prairie grass that moved like ocean waves in the wind. The sky seemed bigger here, endless and blue. She had spent her whole life boxed in by buildings and narrow streets. This space made her feel small and free at the same time. It's beautiful, she said finally. I've never seen anything like it. Black Eagle glanced at her, and the corner of his mouth lifted slightly. The land has power here. It heals. He paused, considering his words. My people have been here many generations. The government moved us, took our hunting grounds, but this land still remembers us. It will remember you too. They arrived at the reservation as afternoon sun painted everything gold. Sarah had expected chaos, poverty, the desperate conditions she'd read about in newspapers. Instead, she found a community. Teepees stood alongside wooden cabins. Children played near the river, their laughter carrying on the wind. Women worked over cooking fires, and men tended horses in a nearby corral. People stopped to watch as Black Eagle's wagon rolled past, their faces curious but not hostile. He brought her to a cabin on the edge of the settlement. It was small but well-built, with a stone chimney and real glass windows. Inside, the single room was clean and simply furnished. A bed frame with a thick buffalo robe, a table with 2 chairs, a cast-iron stove, and shelves holding dishes and supplies. Someone had placed wildflowers in a jar on the table. This is your home, Black Eagle said. He set her bag down carefully. I will sleep in my sister's teepee until we decide what you want to do. Sarah turned to him, surprised. What I want to do? You came here running from something. From someone. His dark eyes were gentle. I will not force you into marriage. You may stay as long as you need. Teach the children English if you wish. But you are free here. That is more important than any agreement we made through letters. Something cracked open in Sarah's chest. She had expected demands, expectations, conditions for his generosity. Instead, this man she'd known for less than a day was offering her something no one ever had. A choice. Freedom. Safety with no strings attached. Why? The word came out broken. Why would you do this? Black Eagle moved toward the door, then paused. Because I know what it is to have everything taken from you. To feel trapped. To survive when others wanted you broken. He looked back at her, and Sarah saw old pain in his eyes, scars that matched her own. We heal each other here, or we don't heal at all. He left quietly, closing the door behind him. Sarah stood alone in her new home and, for the first time in years, wept. But these tears were different. They weren't tears of pain or fear. They were tears of relief, of hope, of a future she was just beginning to imagine. The first week passed in a careful dance of distance and observation. Sarah woke each morning in her cabin, still amazed to find herself alone and unafraid. Black Eagle came by daily, bringing food and asking nothing in return. He would knock softly, wait for her permission to enter, and never stayed longer than necessary. Sometimes he brought his sister, Winona, a woman with kind eyes and quick hands who spoke broken English but communicated perfectly through gestures and smiles. The children were bolder. They appeared on her third day, a small delegation of curious faces peering through her window. When Sarah opened the door, they scattered like sparrows, then slowly crept back. The bravest was a girl of about 8 with missing front teeth and hair that wouldn't stay braided. She pointed at herself and said clearly, Chamani. Sarah pointed at herself in return. Sarah. It was the beginning of something neither of them could have named, but both understood instinctively. Trust, friendship, connection. By the second week, Sarah had 12 regular students ranging from 5 to 14 years old. They met under a large cottonwood tree near the river when weather permitted. She taught them English words, letters, simple sentences. They taught her Lakota words in return, giggling when she mangled the pronunciation. These children had known loss too. Sarah saw it in the way they watched the horizon, in how they startled at loud noises, in the questions they didn't ask about the world beyond the reservation. Black Eagle often watched from a distance during lessons. Sarah felt his presence like warmth from a fire, protective but not smothering. He never interrupted, never criticized her teaching methods, never questioned her authority with the children. It was so different from Thomas, who had questioned everything, undermined everything, controlled everything. One evening, Winona invited Sarah to share dinner at the communal fire. Sarah went hesitantly, aware that she was still an outsider. But the women made space for her, offered her food, and included her in their conversation even when she couldn't understand the words. One elderly woman touched Sarah's hair gently, murmuring something in Lakota. Winona translated, "She says you have brave eyes. Eyes that have seen darkness but still look for light." Sarah's throat tightened. She didn't feel brave. She felt like a coward who had run away. But these women saw something different in her, something she was beginning to see in them. Survivors recognized each other. Black Eagle walked her back to her cabin that night, as he always did. The spring air was soft with the promise of summer, and stars blazed overhead in numbers Sarah had never imagined possible. They walked in companionable silence until he spoke. "The children love you. They speak of you constantly." His voice held warmth and something else, something deeper. "You are a good teacher." "They are good students," Sarah replied. "They want to learn. That makes all the difference." They reached her door, and Black Eagle hesitated. "May I tell you something?" At her nod, he continued. "When I sent for a wife, I did not expect someone like you. I thought perhaps a woman looking for adventure, or one desperate enough to overlook that I am Lakota. But you came for different reasons." Sarah's hand went instinctively to her healed cheek. "How did you know?" "I have eyes. I have lived." He looked out at the moonlit landscape. "My wife died 6 years ago. Smallpox. We had been married 3 years. She was my heart." His voice carried old grief, worn smooth by time but never forgotten. "For a long time, I thought I would never want another wife. But my people need someone to teach the children. The government agents want us to forget our language, our ways. I thought if our children learned English well, they could move between both worlds. Survive." "And your wife?" Sarah asked softly. "Did she move between both worlds?" "She tried. But the worlds did not want her." Black Eagle turned back to Sarah. She was called Mary by the missionaries, but her true name was Juanita Waste. Good spirit. She was kind like you. Gentle. But strong inside, where it mattered. Sarah understood what he wasn't saying. His wife had faced prejudice, hatred, violence from people who hated what she represented. And still she had been kind. Still she had been gentle. That took strength Sarah was only beginning to understand. "I won't replace her," Sarah said firmly. "I can't. I wouldn't want to. No one can replace what we have loved and lost." Black Eagle's eyes met hers in the darkness. "But we can build something new. Something different. If you want to." The question hung between them. Sarah thought about Thomas, about the cage her marriage had been, about the woman she'd become in that darkness. Then she thought about the children's laughter, about Winona's friendship, about waking up without fear. About this man who offered freedom before he offered anything else. "I want to," she whispered. "But I'm afraid. I'm afraid I'm too broken. That I'll disappoint you. That I don't know how to be a wife without being afraid." Black Eagle reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took her hand. His palm was warm, calloused, steady. "Then we will learn together. No hurry. No pressure. We have time." That night, Sarah lay in her bed and held onto those words like a lifeline. We have time. For the first time in years, the future stretched ahead of her not as a threat but as a possibility. And that possibility was enough. Spring melted into summer, and Sarah bloomed with the prairie wildflowers. She had been on the reservation for 3 months, and the woman she'd been in Boston felt like a distant ghost. Her skin had darkened from hours in the sun. Her hands had grown strong from helping Winona tan hides and from working in the small garden behind her cabin. She no longer flinched when people moved too quickly or spoke too loudly. The turning point came on a Tuesday, though Sarah wouldn't realize it until later. She was teaching under the cottonwood tree when a white man rode into the settlement. Government agent, by the look of him, with papers in his throw bag and authority in his posture. The children tensed. Sarah felt them draw closer to her instinctively. Black Eagle emerged from his cabin and approached the man. They spoke in low tones, but Sarah could see the agent's dismissive gestures, the way he looked at Black Eagle like he was less than human. Something hot and fierce rose in Sarah's chest. She stood, smoothing her skirt, and walked toward them. "Excuse me, gentlemen." Her voice came out stronger than she expected. "Can I help with something?" The agent looked her up and down with barely concealed disgust. "You're the white woman shacked up with the chief? Disgraceful. Don't you have any pride?" Sarah felt Black Eagle tense beside her, but she stepped forward. "I'm Sarah Eagle, the English teacher for the reservation school. And you are?" "Mrs. Eagle?" The agent's eyebrows shot up. "You married this savage?" "I married a man who treats me with more dignity and respect than any white man I've ever known." Sarah's voice was ice. "Now state your business or leave. You're interrupting my class." The agent sputtered, showed his papers to Black Eagle with less confidence than before, and left within 10 minutes. As his horse disappeared over the ridge, Sarah's knees went weak. She had just stood up to a government official. She had defended Black Eagle. She had called herself Mrs. Eagle without thinking. Black Eagle looked at her with something like wonder. "You called yourself my wife?" "I." Sarah's face flushed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to presume. It just came out." "Don't apologize." He took her hands, right there in front of everyone. "I have been waiting. Hoping. Sarah, will you truly be my wife? Not because of any arrangement or advertisement, but because you choose it? Because you choose me?" Sarah looked at this man who had given her safety, freedom, time, patience. Who had asked nothing and offered everything. Who made her feel seen and valued and whole. "Yes," she said simply. "I choose you." They were married a week later in a ceremony that blended Lakota tradition with Sarah's Christian background. Winona dressed Sarah in a beautiful deerskin dress decorated with intricate beadwork. The elderly women painted Sarah's face with sacred symbols while singing in Lakota. Then the missionary from Rapid City performed a brief Christian ceremony, awkward but sincere in his attempt to honor both cultures. That night, in the cabin that was now truly theirs, Black Eagle was gentle and patient. He asked permission for every touch, every kiss, every step forward. Sarah wept again, but this time from the overwhelming realization that intimacy could be tender. That her body was her own. That love didn't have to hurt. "Tell me if you need me to stop," Black Eagle whispered against her hair. "Always tell me." "Don't stop," Sarah answered, and meant it with her whole heart. Summer brought its own challenges. A drought threatened the crops. Government rations were delayed, arriving spoiled and insufficient. Tensions rose between the reservation and neighboring white settlements. Sarah watched Black Eagle navigate these problems with diplomacy and strength, always putting his people first, always searching for solutions rather than simply accepting hardship. She saw him in the early mornings, praying to the rising sun in the old way. She saw him at council meetings, speaking with wisdom that bridged traditional knowledge and practical reality. She saw him with the children, patient and playful, teaching them to ride and track and survive. This was no savage, as the agent had called him. This was a leader, a teacher, a man trying to preserve his people's dignity in an impossible situation. Sarah found her own purpose expanding. She taught English during the day and learned Lakota at night. She helped Winona with traditional women's work and shared her own knowledge of reading and writing. She became a bridge between worlds, translating not just language but understanding. When white traders came to the reservation, she negotiated fair prices. When government officials arrived with confusing paperwork, she read the documents carefully and explained the implications. One night, lying beside Black Eagle with the summer stars visible through the smoke hole in their roof, Sarah spoke the truth she'd been carrying. "I was afraid I couldn't love again. That Thomas had broken something in me that couldn't be fixed." Black Eagle turned to her, his hand finding hers in the darkness. "You were not broken. You were trapped. There is a difference. A broken bird cannot fly. A trapped bird is simply waiting for the cage to open. You opened the cage." "No." His voice was firm. "You opened it yourself when you got on that train. I simply gave you a place to remember how to fly." Sarah closed her eyes and let that truth settle into her bones. She had saved herself. Everything after was simply learning to live with that freedom. And here, in this place of healing and hope, she was finally learning to soar. Winter came early to the Dakota Territory that year, sweeping across the plains with brutal efficiency. By October, snow already lay thick on the ground, and the wind carried the sharp bite of deeper cold to come. Sarah stood in her cabin doorway, wrapped in the buffalo robe Black Eagle had given her, watching fat snowflakes drift from an iron sky. A year ago, she'd been trapped in a Boston tenement, and now she was here, truly and completely home. The cabin had transformed over the months. Herbs hung drying from the rafters, harvested with Winona's guidance. Sarah's few books shared shelf space with Black Eagle's sacred items and medicinal plants. A cradle sat in the corner, carved by Black Eagle's own hands in anticipation of the child Sarah carried. She was 4 months along, her belly just beginning to swell beneath her clothing. The baby moved sometimes, gentle flutters that filled her with wonder and terror in equal measure. "You're thinking too hard." Black Eagle's voice came from behind her as he wrapped his arms around her, his hands settling over her stomach. "I can hear your thoughts from across the room." Sarah leaned back against his chest. "I'm thinking about how different everything is. How different I am. A year ago, I couldn't imagine any of this." "Regrets?" His voice was carefully neutral. "Never." She turned in his arms to look up at him. "Fear, yes. I'm terrified I'll be a terrible mother. That I don't know how to raise a child with love because I never saw it growing up. But regrets? No. This is the first real life I've ever lived." The winter brought hardships that tested them all. Rations ran shorter than ever. Game was scarce, driven away by the harsh weather. The government agent came twice, each time with new restrictions and impossible demands. Black Eagle spent long hours in council meetings, his face drawn with the weight of decisions that had no good answers. Sarah threw herself into helping however she could. She taught reading and writing to adults who wanted to learn, knowing that literacy was armor against exploitation. She helped organize the sharing of supplies, making sure no family went without. She wrote letters to missionary organizations back east, carefully worded appeals for aid that wouldn't come with too many strings attached. One bitter January night, a rider came from the neighboring settlement with news that smallpox had broken out in town. Fear rippled through the reservation. Everyone remembered the epidemic 6 years ago, the one that had taken Black Eagle's first wife and dozens of others. Sarah watched Black Eagle's face close down with old grief and new fear. "We quarantine," he said at the council meeting, his voice allowing no argument. "No one goes to town. Anyone showing symptoms is isolated immediately. We have survived worse. We will survive this." But survival came at a cost. 3 days later, one of Sarah's students, little Chamani of the missing teeth and wild hair, developed fever and the telltale rash. Sarah went to the isolation teepee against everyone's protests, including Black Eagle's. "I've had smallpox," she lied, knowing he would physically restrain her otherwise. "As a child. I'm immune." She wasn't sure if she'd had it or not, but the lie was necessary. She couldn't let Chamani face this alone. For 5 days and nights, Sarah barely left the child's side. She bathed Chumani's fevered skin with cool water, sang songs in English and badly pronounced Lakota, told stories until her voice was hoarse. Chumani's mother came to the doorway several times, weeping but unable to enter because she had other children to protect. Sarah understood. She would have done the same. On the 6th day, Chumani's fever broke. The rash began to fade. She would survive, though she would carry the scars. When Sarah finally emerged from the teepee, dizzy with exhaustion and hunger, Black Eagle was waiting. He swept her into his arms without a word and carried her home. "You could have died," he said later, after she'd bathed and eaten and was lying in their bed. His voice was rough with emotion. "You lied to me. Put yourself and our baby at risk." "I know." Sarah reached for his hand. "But I couldn't let her be alone. I couldn't let her think no one cared enough to stay. I've been that person, Black Eagle. The one no one wants to touch. The one everyone walks away from. I couldn't let her feel that." He was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was thick. "You are the bravest person I know. The strongest. But please, wife, do not make me lose you. I have lost too much already." "You won't lose me," Sarah promised. "I'm not going anywhere." Spring returned, as it always did, with a rush of green and a symphony of birdsong. Sarah was 8 months pregnant, moving slowly but still teaching, still working, still throwing herself into the life of the community. Chamani, recovered and scarred but alive, never left her side. The baby came on a warm May morning with Winona and the medicine woman attending. Black Eagle paced outside until Winona finally dragged him in to meet his daughter. She was tiny and perfect, with a shock of black hair and her father's dark eyes. Sarah held her and felt the last piece of her old fear crumble away. "What will we name her?" Black Eagle asked, his voice full of wonder as he touched one perfect tiny hand. Sarah thought of the journey that had brought her here, of the darkness she'd escaped and the light she'd found. "Hope," she said. "We'll call her Hope." In English and in Lakota. A name for both her worlds. "Wasinyan," Black Eagle murmured, touching his daughter's cheek. "Hope. It is a good name. A strong name." That night, with her husband beside her and her daughter sleeping peacefully in the cradle, Sarah reflected on the strange path her life had taken. She had come west running from hell, expecting nothing, hoping only to survive. Instead, she had found purpose, community, love, and a home that existed not in any physical place but in the hearts of the people around her. She thought about the woman she'd been, small and scared and broken. She thought about the mail-order bride advertisement that had been her desperate grasp at escape. She thought about Thomas, and for the first time, she felt only pity for the miserable man he must be. His violence hadn't destroyed her. She had survived, and in surviving, she had learned to thrive. Black Eagle stirred beside her, his arm tightening around her waist. "What are you thinking, wife?" Sarah smiled in the darkness. "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst things that happen to us lead us to the best places. I'm thinking that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." "We are all exactly where we're supposed to be," Black Eagle agreed. "Together. Building something new from broken pieces. That is the way of healing." Outside, the prairie wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of sage and possibility. Inside, a family slept peacefully, bound together by choice and love and the simple, extraordinary act of surviving long enough to find each other. Sarah Mitchell Eagle closed her eyes and let herself sink into the truth she'd finally learned. Home was not a place you found but a piece you created, one brave choice at a time. And she was home at last.